All right, folks, we're gonna get started. Welcome, everyone. So excited you're all here tonight. My name's Julia. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm on the team here at Books Are Magic. Before we get started, just a few quick logistics to get out of the way. Want to let folks know we're going to be doing a hand-raised audience Q&A toward the end of the event. So start thinking of your questions and then hang on to them. At the end of the talk tonight, Rachel is going to be signing and personalizing books at that desk near where you checked in. And we're also going to have both Rachel's book and Victoria's latest book available to purchase at the register. Finally, if you are joining us virtually on the live stream, which I saw there's a few of you, welcome. We'd love to encourage you also to buy a copy of Thank You for Sharing. You can use the link in the live stream description to do so. Okay, so with all of that out of the way, it's my pleasure to welcome you all tonight to our celebration of Thank You for Sharing. Most of my coworkers know that I've been talking this book up since it was first announced in Publishers Weekly well over a year ago, and I really haven't been able to shut up about it since. I'm so happy to say that it met all of my expectations and more. Thank You for Sharing, for those who don't know, is the story of former camp crushes / rivals who reconnect years later when they're put together on a work project. Rachel so perfectly balances witty banter and tender emotional moments, and this book has some of my favorite side characters I've read, and Thank You for Sharing is truly what I've been calling the queer Jewish summer camp alumni romance of my dreams. I'm so excited it's finally out in the world so that we can all celebrate it together tonight. Rachel Runya Katz is a contemporary romance writer living in Seattle with her partner, cat, and far too many houseplants. She has a PhD in biomedical engineering, which is minimally helpful for this endeavor. Her books center queer Jews of color and their layered lives of joy, sadness, and love. And who better to join Rachel in discussing this incredible romance than Victoria Lee. Victoria grew up in Durham, North Carolina, where she attended an art school and played piano competitively. She has a PhD in psychology. We've got a lot of doctors out here, which she uses to overanalyze fictional characters and also herself. Lee is the author of A Shot in the Dark, as well as A Lesson in Vengeance, The Fever King, and its sequel, The Electric Air. So that's enough from me. Without further ado, let's all give a very warm welcome to Rachel and Victoria.
Hello. So we were already talking back there. As you know, I am obsessed with this book. Everything Julia said is exactly how I feel about it. It's sweet, it's tender, it's got like these moments that really just tug at your heartstrings. Like the romance is so pure and beautiful. And my first question is, why is Daniel so hot?
I think I wanted to do a little bit of like a study in contrast, and so I thought it was sort of funny to have this rather like classically hot guy with, you know, his tattoos and all of that just like so badly fumble trying to flirt with somebody in the opening scene. So I thought that would be fun. I have gotten a lot of comments that both of them are very hot, and I'm very proud of that. I had very like clear ideas of who they were in my head, and I wanted to portray that pretty specifically, so you can't like think I was just, you know, slapping a random celebrity on a character. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I mean, that's part of what I loved about Daniel, was that it was so easy to imagine him as like whatever your perfect like platonic ideal of like a man is, right? Like and then yeah, that entire first scene where they're on the plane, and like there's something that makes it so much more accessible, like a love interest who's just like socially clumsy like that, where you can somehow like be attracted to them theoretically, but also feel like, I don't know, maybe it could happen. They're not just like on a different plane of existence. So for one, like we kind of talked about this a little bit as well, but like one thing I know everyone loves to hear about is unlikable heroines. And I want to know more about your approach to writing Leah and what you would say to people who claim that Leah is unlikable.
Yeah, so having now had the book be not available for everyone, but available for early readers now for quite a few months, I have gotten tagged in like plenty of reviews that talk about how much they hated Leah or hated Leah at first. And I find it funny because I've made friends with other authors who've had this kind of same response. And they're like, yeah, well, I write unlikable heroines. And all of the girls they're talking about are like my absolute favorite fictional characters. So I think partly I don't totally have the same assessment of what is likable or unlikable. But if you're somebody who likes romance a lot, you know there's different kinds of tropes that people like to write to. And a trope you could describe this book as is grumpy sunshine or maybe prickly soft. And most typically, grumpy sunshine books, the grump is the man. If it's a heterosexual romance, the grump is the man, and the sunshine is the woman. And I wanted to flip that on its head, in part because to me, grumpy sunshine with grump as the man, not always, like all of my opinions have exceptions, but sometimes that can be a little bit like when you're in a job interview and you say like, oh, I just work too hard. Because being overly sunshiny, overly caring, all of that is just like being too much the societal idea of a perfect woman. And being overly assertive and, you know, being, that is like too much the societal idea of like a perfect man, right? And so having the woman be the one who was sometimes too assertive and sometimes too blunt, and have the man be the one who sometimes was a little bit avoidant and not always asking for what he needed and putting others first, like that made to me a slightly more interesting way to think about it. But because of that, people are harder on her for it than they are on male characters who have kind of the same set of behaviors, because she is going now so far out of what is like her gendered idea of perfection, and that makes people not always respond to her well. But also then there's as many people who are tagging me and being like, oh, I love her so much because I'm sometimes grumpy like that, or my sister acts like this, and it was so beautiful to see her represented, like that kind of thing. So I think it's a dicey road to walk, because I'm sure like people are not always nice to your female characters, and they can be mean to them for a lot of different reasons. But I think that making that kind of like quote unlikable person can be a more interesting and more flawed character to write about.
Yes, that is one of the best answers that but I think that's kind of what makes it, like this idea of like grumpy sunshine with the female character being grumpy. There's something so escapist about that. I think like as an AFAB person, just this idea that like, oh, I could be assertive, I could be like imperfect, I could be displeasurable to be around at times and still deserve love. And I think that a lot of like AFAB people and women reading that will feel like both seen but also liberated in a way to just like be themselves and not always be trying to like be cool girl.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's kind when it matters. Like she would, bury a body for anybody she cares deeply about, and she cares for Daniel many times throughout the book, but she's not always nice. And I think, being kind versus being nice, I would rather be with somebody who is kind, and Daniel gets that, in the book, and so he loves her for, despite, and because of all of that, because when it comes down to it, she is always treating him well. That doesn't mean she's not snapping at him sometimes, particularly when she's hungry.
So kind of similarly on an identity note to like being a woman. So Leah and Daniel are both Jews of color, and Leah is also queer. And so many people assume that all Jews are white and Ashkenazi, and that all like heroines in these heterosexual romances are straight. So I wanted to know, like, well, for one, I think that there are so many Jews of color as well as queer people out there who feel incredibly represented by this book. And just your characters are so well-rounded, they occupy multiple spaces and intersections of race, ethnicity, religion, and queerness. So I was wondering if you could talk about the importance of writing multiple diverse characters in literature.
Thank you. Thank you for asking that. So when I started writing it, I wasn't really sure I was trying to publish it. I was just writing it for fun. And then kind of once I felt like I was really like having a book on my hands, then I started to get a little bit worried about it, because I was like, oh, like I'm trying to publish this book that's got like a queer Black Jew and a Korean Jew, and like that I dropped they them pronouns for her best friend on the first page, and like how is this gonna go? But I think that what was important to me was writing a book that felt like it could be my friend group, you know, like it's not, nobody is like specifically anybody I know, but you know, I find it funny when people like say, oh, this is so, it's like trying to be diverse, when I think about like who I've known in my life, and like depending on where I've lived, like I've lived places that where the dominant ethnicity is white people, and then I have more white friends there, and then I've been places where that's not the dominant ethnicity, and then that's not who I'm friends with. You know, I officiated a wedding this summer between an Ethiopian man and an Indian woman, you know, and they had, you know, one was raised Hindu-ish, one was raised Christian, so they had their Jewish friend officiate the wedding. And I was thinking that when I, like, after, you know, I had recently been tagged in a review saying that it was trying so hard to be diverse, and I was just like, but this is what my life is. So in some ways it's sort of like, it's like not trying at all to write these kind of intersections of identities, because they're identities I hold or people dear to me hold. And there's a kind of a passage in the Yom Kippur chapter where Leah's reflecting on it, and she's talking about how she doesn't know what it is to be Jewish without being black, or black without being Jewish. Like, they are inextricably linked, because she has never been one without the other. And that's sort of in part how I feel like when you talk about the difference between womanism and feminism, or like intersectional identities there, if you're a black woman, the way you experience gender discrimination is not the same as the way you experience it as a white woman. The way I experience anti-Semitism as a black Jew is not the same as how I would experience it if I were a white assimilated Jew. The way I experience anti-blackness is not the same as how I would experience it if I were not Jewish, right? All of these things are kind of entwined, and so writing from that perspective is like the most natural thing in that way. And I think, you know, all of the books I plan to write will have like a black Jewish femme as one of the characters in it, at least one of the characters in it, because I really wish that I had been able to read that growing up. And nothing has made me cry like getting messages from people who are black Jews or other Jews of color, or people who have a relative who is a black Jew, and telling me that they cried reading the book, and that, you know, this is the first book they've seen that like really speaks to them. And then of course I tell them, you know, they should go read Kelly Kane's work. Like there's some other people out there, but there's not enough. And so writing from that kind of perspective both is able to like reflect the world I see and hopefully expand other people's worlds.
Well, for one, thank you for that answer. It was amazing. Yeah, there's something like when people do say, when they read like a book or watch a TV show, and there's like too many diverse people, they're like, oh, they're just like putting them in there for like some kind of quota. It's like, you're telling on yourself, right? Like, they think that like that's not realistic. Side note for Black Jewish authors, check out Circe Moskowitz and Natasha Diaz, because they're so this is not something I have a question about on here, but since you brought up Yom Kippur scene, I would love to hear some about like why you decided to make like the high holidays such like a large motivating thread, I guess, in the book for like their emotional arcs.
So I was not writing it at this time of year, so it's lucky that it came out around. So it's not just because of that. Part of it is because I had a lot of how I thought of the book. I didn't really outline it when I first wrote it, which is not advised. You should outline your books before you write them. But so I just kind of had like these. I had the whole first scene just like came to in my head at, like in full, and I wrote it. But I had like floating bits of dialogue. And one of the floating bits of dialogue was the thing that Leah says to the greeter who asks them if they're in the wrong place on Yom Kippur. So I kind of that just was like in my head, and I wanted to use that line somewhere. And so there's that. But the other reason is because, I mean, this is not like giving anything away, it's in the content warning, but Daniel's father had died a little bit under a year before the start of the book. And if you are Jewish, you know this. If you're not, you might not. But on Yom Kippur, there's a memorial service called Yizkor. And you really only go to Yizkor, I mean, you're allowed to, but like the typical tradition is you only go to Yizkor if you have lost a parent, a spouse, or a sibling. And so it was a really sort of useful way for me to force him to confront his grief, because one of his issues is that he tends to be avoidant. And so his father died, he shut down, and then he got himself to kind of get going again, but didn't deal with those feelings at all. And for him, going to Yom Kippur is this pivotal moment because it's the first time when the rabbi says it's time for Yizkor, and like Leah's like, okay, let's go, like time to go nap. He's like, oh, I want to stay, and he has to deal with the fact that that's now something that he's supposed to do, and so it was really useful for his particular character arc to have a scene that took place over Yom Kippur, and then it was also useful to show how caring Leah could be because he's kind of in emotional conflict, and even though he doesn't tell her what's going on, she still is there to support him.
That actually is related to one of my questions, which is related to Leah and Daniel. But like, I love that you made Leah a survivor and that her experiences with trauma weren't, sugar-coated or swept under the rug. Daniel, as you mentioned, is also dealing with a lot of grief over the loss of his father. So what was your approach to incorporating serious subjects like sexual assault and grief in romance?
I think I generally like my happy with my sad and my sad with my happy. So I don't think it ever totally occurred to me not to do that. And I actually kept calling it a rom-com when I had the offer call with my agent, and she's like, there's a lot of trauma in it. And she was called it rom sad, and then it was one of my comrades at Carolina Jews for Justice who coined rom-trom, and that's how I got the rom-trom. So that's the full story there. But yeah, so I think it didn't really totally occur to me that I shouldn't necessarily do that, although I realize now that there's like a lot of rom-com that doesn't really like get into that, and that's also can be really fun too. But I think my favorite trade review was from Library Journal, and their kind of tagline was I was portraying where romance meets real life. And that was really what I was going for. Like I really wanted it to feel like what I think falling in love and finding somebody feels like, and that is both falling in love and finding somebody and learning to be okay with yourself, because you can't really accept love until you learn to be okay with yourself. And in order for that to like unfold in an interesting way, having them deal with kind of bigger things that I think a lot of people are dealing with was, I think, like a really nice way to show that. I tried to do it in a like, I chose to have both of these things happen like prior to the start of the book, so it's not like in timeline, and I think it can be really useful to like watch people really struggle, like be really in the thick of it during a book. But I think for me, while writing it, I started writing it a little bit before vaccines became available in early 2021, and I was so isolated and so unhappy, and I wanted like the realism of people having like trauma and stuff going on in their lives, but I think I didn't want to be like fully in it as I was writing. I think my second book it's a little bit more in it, and I think I was more prepared to write that. So a lot of people said that like they felt like I think Jen Comfort said it was like angst with mittens on. So like, because we're not like fully in the thick of it, it's not as intense as it could be, but you still get like all of the emotional fallout of what had happened to them.
That was one of my favorite things about the book. I mean, kind of similar to we were talking earlier about like the grumpy sunshine and how like weirdly this like rom-com aspect can be more escapist than like just a pure rom-com, because it's more realistic. It's easier to like completely immerse yourself in the book when things are imperfect and when people are struggling with things that you can relate to. Like, it doesn't feel as much like unattainable. Mm-hmm. So I was really pleased that you did that. I thought it worked extremely well.
Oh, thank you.
Relatedly, I love that therapy has a role in this book. So we seriously need to see more of that in fiction in general. But particularly in romance, because it's like one of those genres where everything's about the emotions, everything's about the big feelings. Mm-hmm. So what would you say to readers who might be struggling with trauma or mental health issues?
Yeah, I think therapy is really important. If you have, and I know not everybody has access to that, and if you don't, like if it's not accessible, I think it would be really important to try to see if there's like community services in your area, because there are like, that is something that exists for free in most cities. And you need to start to talk about things. And if you have, many psychiatric disorders can be really helped with meds, but the combination of meds and therapy is typically what actually is the most successful. I think that it's okay to not be okay, and I know that sounds like so trite, but that's something that's helped me a lot, because I think I had a lot of difficulty with some of the lower points of my mental health, where it felt like I was never going to feel better, and that makes it almost harder to seek help, because it's like, well, if this is never going to go away, like, what's the point? But it's sort of better to be working on it always, and even if it's not gone, just be actively trying, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's always going to be better, but there will be better moments. And I really wanted them to engage in me, like, actively on page, because since I had given them sort of heavier things to be dealing with, I was a little bit concerned about having it come off as though, like, if you find the person you love, now all your problems are gone. And because I was, like, if you're not dealing with heavier topics, and then everybody's just perfectly happy at the end just for meeting each other, that's fine. But I think it would have felt like, oh, his dad died, well, now he's in love, okay, we fixed it. And I really didn't want to say that, and I didn't want that to be communicated. So throughout the story, like, Leah has been going to therapy for years. She knew she needed that, and that's what's kept her okay, but, like, her therapist has to actually, like, push her to realize how much better she's gotten. And Daniel goes to therapy for the first time, and something that I really wanted to include, it's like almost a throwaway line, but Daniel's best friend at work is Jordan, who he is a straight black man, and he had actually already been in therapy and told Daniel that he had been in therapy, and that, like, helped him go, and that was really important to me, to show that, like, there are men who do go, and that it's okay, and you can talk about this, and it might be trial and error, but, like, to find the right person, to find the right fit, but you need to have something other than just yourself or just your partner to get you there.
And I mean, I also loved that therapy wasn't treated as this, like, magic wand or panacea. As you said, like, you have to keep working on it. Just the same way that, like, love wasn't a magic wand. Like, you go and you learn the skills and you have to use them. Mm-hmm. And so, there was this clear sense of journey and, like, ongoing journey in the book, which I appreciated. Thank you. Forgiveness is also, like, a major theme. So what are you hoping readers take away from this relationship progression between Leah and Daniel?
I think it's a little bit of a, like, you gotta give people second chances. Leah is really angry at Daniel at first, because without, like, in broad strokes, to not spoil too much, she sort of got bullied at summer camp, and he was her best friend and didn't stick up for her, and that's, like, the thing she's most mad about. She also thinks he betrayed her about Maccabia, which is Color Wars. He thinks that's what she's mad about. That's, like, very minor compared. But, even I chose it that way because, not standing up for somebody, your best friend who's being bullied, is objectively a bad thing, but it's also not, like, evil. However, with Leah's issues, like, with the set of issues she's had throughout her life since then, it's particularly bad for her. And I wanted to be careful about how I set up the kind of, like, enemies to lovers-ish aspect, because I didn't want it to be so bad that, like, he was irredeemable, nor did I want it to be so banal that you're like, why would this have made her feel any type of way? But, like, a big thing for her is, like, learning that kind of making quick judgments that have, although they've been protective for her throughout her life, they're not always right. And because ultimately Daniel becomes one of her closest friends before he becomes more than that. And if she hadn't been willing to, like, try to let go and try to get past it, then she wouldn't have that. And also he forgives her for her, like, avoidance and the things she ends up doing. So I don't know, I guess it also fits well into the, like, Yom Kippur atonement thing, where it all comes back to Yom Kippur. That, it's okay to make some mistakes as long as you try to do better.
I mean, and theirs isn't, like, the only relationship in the book that has this level of depth and all of these, layers of context to it, right? Because there's this amazing found family in the book, the Speakeasy Survival Club. So what does found family represent to you, and how did you balance, like, just from a craft perspective, I want to know this, because I'm really bad at this, but, like, how did you balance writing so many well fleshed out characters with their own unique personalities and struggles, but also their own unique ways of supporting each other?
Well, thank you for saying I did it well. Character comes a lot easier to me than plot. So in some ways it's sort of like, it's less how did I do that and how did I do that and then turn it into like a narrative story, because that part is a little bit quicker for me. But I think part of it was that, again, when I started writing this, I was like going to lab in a shortened shift, cramming as much work as possible, and then just going home and reading an entire book. Like that was what I did. And so I was very isolated, and so this like speakeasy survival club where like a group of friends kind of meets over drinks sounded like the best thing in the entire world. Like being in public with a group of 4 people, that seemed like so fun. So I think that part was like, it was just, that was like pure escapism for me to write. I think one of the things that helped them feel more fleshed out is that I decided to put these meeting minutes that they take like for fun at their survival club meetings, and I put them between some chapters. It kind of marks the passage of time. Like if there's one between a chapter, a week passed. If there's 2 weeks passed. But they rotate who is secretary, and the book is only dual point of view, so it's only between Daniel and Leah. But sometimes Jordan or Siobhan is the secretary for the Speakeasy Survival Club, and so you actually sometimes get like these bullet pointed lists written in their point of view. And I think it's something that like you might not really notice while reading, but it adds more depth to those characters, because you're not only getting how they interact with Daniel and Leah from Daniel and Leah's perspective, you also get just like little snippets of their own voice and how they process things. And like Jordan's notes tend to be sort of short and glib, and Siobhan's will be like really verbose, and she writes down kind of way too much, and you can sort of get the feel of who they are as people. And then also I think Neen's Leah's best friend, and that friendship, while Neen and Leah are not me and my best friend, but the friendship I think is like pretty similar to the relationship I have with my closest friend from growing up. And so I think in that way, like, it's sort of, I think people need like a well-rounded system around them, and focusing on what each person needs kind of gives you what character you need to write for them. Like Neen has to be kind of no nonsense, because Leah sometimes is on her bullshit. And so that like helps you get like a seed of this character that you can then flesh out. Kayla is Daniel's older sister. She needs to be a little bit hovering because he can get really avoidant. You need somebody who's like gonna be checking in and like telling him to take care of himself. So you kind of figure out what your main character's flaws are, and then build out what support system would help them get to their like best and most healed selves.
I'm mentally taking notes. So this book in a lot of ways feels like a love letter to Chicago and to the Field Museum. So how did you go about building such a strong sense of place? Again, asking craft questions for myself.
I love Chicago. I lived there. I was born in Alabama, but I lived there for the first part of my life. And then even after that, my whole extended family on my mother's side was in Chicago. So I went there like every year. So I am like somewhat familiar with the city, and it's kind of my favorite city in the country. So in that way, like I love it. So I was able to, have the characters love it. And I also love the Field Museum. So some of that was probably like a little bit of laziness. I was really so PBS has a series on YouTube called PBS Eons. And I was really into watching them before I went to sleep, and they talk about evolution. And so that's kind of how I decided to make her sort of a junior curator. I did still have to do some research about like what the job titles actually are. She's an exhibition developer / designer is like what they call it. And what she does and like how you would build an exhibit. But I do just find that very cool, and I wanted to have both of them. Like Daniel's creative, he's in advertising, and I really wanted both of them to kind of care about their jobs and like feel like they're ambitious and like have something they're really working toward, but I didn't want it to feel too close to home for me, so I didn't want to make her like a research scientist. So that's sort of how I got there. But yeah, the Field Museum is so cool. Everybody should go to it. Natural history museums are amazing. And so I do love it enough that I think that's how I can imbue the sense of place, because I actually really do love those places.
I will say exhibition designer is like a career path that I wish I had known about.
Yeah.
It sounds so cool.
Yeah, it never really like occurred to me that that was something you could do
Right.
as a kid. Like I
It's
didn't
like,
know.
yeah, I guess somebody. So my like dream as a kid was I wanted to be whoever gets to like name streets.
That's so good.
What kind of I mean I don't know, maybe the answer is like Wikipedia, but what kind of research did you do into like museum curatorship?
Yeah, so some things I just like looked up a lot of stuff on the Field Museum website and looked at how their emails were structured so I could make her fake emails and like, what the job titles were. I also like went down a pretty long rabbit hole of the biological anthropology program at Northwestern, and then I like looked through different museum handbooks and also like some open courseware stuff about how a museum exhibition is designed, which I really did not need. Like, you're not that in the weeds of it. But I did just like look through some of that. There's a bit just inspired by things I think are cool. So like there's a part where they're talking about the Venus figurines, and I remember like reading a few articles about this after seeing it on Tumblr like a really long time ago. But there are these Venus figurines that are found kind of like all over like Europe-ish that have like really enlarged breasts and hips and bellies, and like often don't have a head, and people for a long time thought that it was like men making them in a way that like sexualizes women's bodies. But then some people, like, I don't know exactly when this happened, but people started like looking for alternative explanations, and pregnant people took pictures of their bodies from like the bird's eye view from themselves, and that actually looks really similar to the bird's eye view of a Venus figurine. And so like maybe this was actually pregnant people like making self-portraits based on what they could see, and I think that kind of thing is really cool, and so I wanted to like incorporate that love of like discovering something might not be as it seems, because I think that's sort of like a parallel to their whole relationship, and so I wanted to put that like everywhere I could in the book so that it all feels like it's sort of coming together with the like central theme of the couple.
Well, I feel like that's so cool because there's something that I didn't know before I read the book, so I appreciate that. So on like a lighter note, so there's so many instances of like tropey goodness, including my personal favorite, Only One Bed. So what are your favorite tropes, and how do you make these well-loved tropes work so well and feel so fresh?
Yeah, Only One Bed is my favorite trope. I will put some version of Only One Bed in every book I write, I think. Yeah. I really only considered one scene when I first thought of it as like Only One Bed. It's sort of the only one air mattress when they're stuck in the museum. But it was pointed out to me by other people that like they also take a Yom Kippur nap together, and then they're again like in one bed when they go home from the museum. So I'm like, okay, maybe I did really go over. So I think that's part of it. Only One Bed oftentimes is like results in some form of like sexual intimacy, and I didn't do that, and so I think that can like, you know, just sometimes like getting people to expect something and then subverting that expectation can like help to keep things fresh. There's a lot of Only One Bed in my second book, which will be out next fall too, so I'm keeping my promise so far. I really love anything where like people are kind of like a little bit miserable at the start. So like some form of like enemies to lovers, or like estranged friends to lovers, like where there's that like good tension between them, where it's not sort of all copacetic.
All right, I'm gonna do a little lightning round before we go to
Okay.
Q&A, so don't overthink your answers to these. This one, I'll start you off easy.
Okay.
So, Sweet Potato is my favorite fictional cat ever.
Yes.
Do you have a cat, and what's its name?
I do. Her name is Essie, and she's a tuxedo.
Ooh. I also have a black cat.
I love tuxedo and black cats.
So what are your favorite book tropes you can't say Only One Bed and Bridal Lovers?
I really like the micro trope of when somebody like has broken up with somebody, because they liked somebody else. I don't like if you've read Beach Read, there's a part where January's like, oh, you were dancing with me, but you had like this girlfriend. He's like, no, I broke up with her at the party, and she's like, you broke up with her on the phone right before you danced with me. And he's like, yeah, and she's like, why? And he's like, why do you think that like microtrope?
That's a very good and specific trope. What's your least favorite trope?
Ooh. It's like sort of trite, but I struggle with like accidental pregnancy as a trope, just because it's usually involves the people then having the child, especially. And I think I just sometimes like in this environment, especially if a book isn't like considering abortion as like a possible, like when you accidentally get pregnant, I like don't really. I get uncomfortable if they're like, oh, I'm accidentally pregnant, and I'm like, my only choice is to have this baby and marry this person, and like that doesn't always feel so good to me, although I'm sure there's books that do it that I would enjoy, because, you know, everybody has their own take on it, but I'd say that's my least favorite.
Extremely valid. Top book recommendation right now.
Oh, okay, well, other than A Shot in the Dark, which is Victoria's book, yeah, I feel like I keep reading. So the problem when you become an author is you get your friends' books early, and then people are like, "What are you reading?" I'm like, "It comes out in February 2024." So I think that's out. I really liked After Hours on Milagro Street, which is I forgot her first name. Her last name is Lopez, but it's a book about. There's like a little bit of mysticism because maybe there's like a ghost haunting it, but it's about a Mexican-American woman who goes back to, I believe it's like in Kansas. There's this like really, and she's fighting for like the place that her family has owned. It's really beautiful and gets really deep into the history of like this Midwestern town that I had no idea existed at all. So I highly recommend it.
I've never heard of that, but I'm definitely going to read it now. Barbie or Oppenheimer?
Barbie. Oppenheimer is too long.
I'm the opposite.
Oh, it was so long. I went to Shoal on Rosh Hashanah for less than the time. Yeah.
Okay, that's a lie.
We did. I was really happy. I convinced my parents that we could do like Shathari and Torah service, or Torah service and Musaf, and I didn't want to do all three, and they listened, and we were only there for 2.5 hours each day. It was amazing.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, last question. This is not a lightning round one. You can take more time. So you mentioned that you have another book coming out next year. Can you tell us what it's about, or are you allowed to?
I was told I could talk about it on Instagram. I haven't said the title yet because that's not officially announced, but it is a sapphic, semi-estranged friends to lovers road trip romance.
Ooh. I love friends to lovers. Everything to lovers.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like the trip they were supposed to go on before their best friend died. So we're back in the rom-trom-com.
All right, gonna open it up to Q&A now. So if anybody has questions for Rachel, let me know. Yes.
Hi. What song that you think of for Daniel and Leia?
There's a song called Wasn't Looking. I don't know if it's by somebody named Eliza or Eliza, because I did not check. But it's from the perspective of a woman singing. I don't know if it uses pronouns for the other person, but if you imagine it as Daniel singing it to Leah, then I think it fits them really well.
All right. Any other questions? Also, you need to make a playlist just for us all.
I do have one. Maybe I should post it.
Yes. Yes, in the back.
3 things you'd take to a desert island.
I don't know. You, my cat. That's my card.
What is your favorite quote from the book?
Ooh.
Question was, what is your favorite quote from a book for live stream people?
Oh yeah, the other one was, what would you take on a desert? 3 things to take on a desert island. I think it's Daniel. It's, I want to kiss her, he thinks, and he swallows the thought whole.
Yes.
What's your fan cast for them?
What is your fan cast for them?
Yeah, so I wasn't like imagining people, but I did have to send people for the cover. So the one I sent for Daniel, I referenced in the book because Mean really likes Grey's Anatomy and is like going on to Leah about how she should sleep with Daniel. And she's like, Leah's like, I don't watch your medical dramas. Like, I'm never gonna watch your medical dramas. You can't convince me to do this. And then Mean's like, well, he looks like Nico Kim, who's played by Alex Landy. And then I go into the ways he looks different from Nico Kim, but yeah. And then I sent Laura Harrier for Leah, who she usually doesn't wear her hair natural, so I sent separate like hair references, but she was in Black Klansman. Also in Spider-Man. Yeah.
Is there going to be a cinematic universe to your books?
There kind of is. There's some Hanukkah gelt instead of Easter eggs. It's not like the major secondary characters are not the like main characters in the next book. So a lot of people have asked me like if Mean's novel is next. Sadly, they are not the main character, but there's a cameo from a major main character, I won't tell you who, and then there's also, a major secondary character, and then there's also, like, if you read both, there'll be a couple names where you might be like, oh, that's who that is, but you do not need to read both to understand.
Yes.
How many non-work related books have you read this year?
How many non-work related books have you read this year?
Do you consider romance novels work or
Non biochemistry?
Okay. So I had to block my Goodreads because I could not deal with seeing reviews, so I don't keep track. I think when I blocked it, I had read like 30 something. I'm gonna guess like high 50s right now.
It's more than one a week.
Yeah. I do read, I mean, especially like romance, I'll read very quickly. I'm slower with literary fiction, but I do read it sometimes.
So much respect.
So you guys touched on this a little bit already, but Jewish holidays play a huge role in the book. So I was wondering what your favorite holiday is and why.
Well, I like Halloween. This was Jewish holidays play a big role in the book. What's my favorite holiday and why? Yeah, I like dressing up. So I guess as a kid, I really liked Purim when I would do that because dressing up is super fun. I like Passover for the first 2 days, and then I get really sick of it. But I like the Seders. That's fun.
I guess like your Passover opinion is like, do you consume kidneyot or not? Because I feel like that's kind of like the difference as to whether it's like a horrible experience or a somewhat tolerable one.
Yeah, so for people who don't know, kidneyot are these, so on Passover you can't have leavened things. So very clearly like bread, pasta, that's easy. But kidneyot is like this other set of things that some people say it's about like cross-contamination or just like being similar. I'm not totally clear on why, but like you can't have rice or corn or all of that stuff. If you're an Ashkenazi Jew, you're not supposed to have that. If you are Sephardic, that's fine. But then recently, the Conservative Consortium of Rabbis decided that it's silly for there to be two different sets of rules, so everybody should be able to eat kidneyot. But I grew up not eating it, and one year I tried to do it, and I put peanut butter on matzah, and I was like, this feels wrong. I can't, and so I don't eat kidneyot. That was how that went.
I do, however, strongly recommend taking matzah and melting chocolate on top and then like some sea salt.
So
Yes.
good. Yes, so good.
Caramel.
Yeah.
Yes.
If both of your books were in a cinematic universe together, would there be any characters that were friends across the two of you?
I feel like Ellie and Daniel would get along, and I can't really explain why I think that.
I think they're both like soft-hearted in a way that like Yeah, I can really see that. Daniel's also pretty creative, and Ellie is a photographer. So is Wyatt in A Shot in the Dark. I think Need would get along really well with Wyatt. I think,
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. I think Need is a like a computer scientist, but they do really fun like nail art. It's one of their big things, and they're creative and a little bit too free-spirited about certain things. And I think that they would really enjoy like Wyatt's art in particular.
Well, and I also think that they would enjoy that Wyatt would be completely down to let me do his nails.
Yes, for sure.
So in the book, Daniel and Leah make kimchi latkes. I wanted to know if you ever tried that, or what other crazy combinations kind of would be fun for Hanukkah.
So I haven't done that, and I do plan to this year. There are recipes online. I've had like kimchi and potato things before, so it's kind of why I knew it. I was like, this has to be a thing, and I googled it, and it was. Yeah, that's really good. I guess it's not like a crazy combination, but something like having my mom lived in the South for 12 years, and kreplach are like soup dumpling things, but in the like Jewish family that kind of like low-key adopted her in the South always made fried kreplach. And that was the like southern twist on it.
That sounds good.
And you can fry it like either savory, or you can fry it like in like sweet, and both are delicious.
So there's lots of great food in this book, which brings me to a great question. When are you going to drop the recipe book?
Oh, I have a subscription to New York Times Cooking. And that is like all I do. Oh yeah, I was asking when I would drop a recipe book. I don't think I'm capable of that.
I think we have time for like one or two more questions if anyone has them. Yes.
Who's playing Leah in the movie?
The question was who's playing Leah in the movie. If any film company would like to adapt this, please hit me or Jessica Maleo, my agent. Nobody is playing anybody in any movie.
Who would you like to?
Okay, the question was who would I like to? I mean, Zoe Kravitz would be fun because she is Black and Jewish, but she is, I think, like, she's not at all how I pictured Leah, which is sort of difficult. I think also, like, a very different age. I don't know, I guess I'll just say Laura Harrier again. Sure.
Yes.
So a lot of authors have mentioned that their main character is an extension of themselves. But do you view that with Leah, or do you kind of view her as a sibling, or more of a friend, or an extension of yourself?
So the question was, a lot of authors view their main character as an extension of themselves, and whether I feel that way with Leah. Yes and no. The yes is that, like, all of the characters, so Leah and Daniel are both main characters, and I just made all of the people in the book up, so they're all me, because they all came from my mind. But nobody is, like, literally supposed to be me, or nor do they feel like that. Like, I was always, I think anytime you have somebody going through something like emotional in particular, to me, in order to write it well, I need like a seed of truth, so I have to have experienced that emotion. It doesn't have to be in response to the same thing, but like kind of coming from that seed of truth. And so, I haven't lost a parent, for example, but I have had other grief, and so like I drew on my grief to make Daniel's grief feel more real, and so it's not like quite an extension of myself in that, like, it's not these like literal, it's not so literally. I have trouble with that sometimes because I'm like, I sometimes wonder if like in romance people there's like more of an assumption that you're writing like some level of self-insertion based on who's typically writing romance and who's typically reading it. But I think that any author in any genre, like, it's all you, because it's all a figment of your imagination,
When sitting down and facing a blank page, what is your process for conquering that page?
So the question was, when sitting down and facing a blank page, what was my process for conquering that? That's a great question. Not something I had an issue with when writing Thank You for Sharing. I think when you're writing not under contract, in order to get a debut novel out, you have to have a full manuscript before you send it to an agent, before that agent then sends it to publishers. And I was just like, I had too much time because of the time it was. And I would just kind of, whenever I had inspiration, just go and write a ton. And then the second book came around, and my life was really different. I wrote the proposal, it got approved, and then I had to finish my PhD, so I didn't write it all. Then I moved across the country, started a new job, and had to write. And that was really difficult, and one of the best tips I got, was from my author, friend, and agent sibling, Ava Wilder, which is called sprinting. And so we even ordered these cute little timers called time timers, it's a great name, for our desks, and we set 20-minute timers and then send each other a salute emoji. And then we just write for 20 minutes, and it's really helpful because since it's such a confined period of time, I can just write for 20 minutes. Anyway, you can do anything for 20 minutes, right? And so I don't look at my phone, I don't get too in my head, and when you're sprinting, you're not supposed to edit as you go, you're just supposed to write whatever comes out. And then it might come out good, it might come out bad, but you have something there. And sometimes I'll keep sprinting, but other times I just do one sprint to start me off, and then it's no longer a blank page, and I can kind of keep going.
All right, well, thank you for sharing, Bob. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Just a few final words for me, and then I'll let you all loose. Want to thank everyone again for coming tonight. Thank you both for such a wonderful conversation. As I mentioned earlier, we do have copies of Thank You for Sharing, as well as A Shot in the Dark, Victoria's book, up for sale at the front register. And we're going to have Rachel signing near where my colleague Jenny is standing over there. We're going to give her just a beat to get settled, and then we'll start lining folks up. And we do ask that when you line up, you just take your belongings with you so we can start to break down the space. That's all from me, and let's give these two one more round of applause.